Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for being here, joining Shotai and the Turtleback Zendo for this morning's talk. And I wanted to talk today about the the Bodhisattva Vows. But before that, let me quote something that just was shared from Shoto Mitra-roshi. And it's important. He says, whoops, that's the wrong email. Let's try a different email. Okay, the idea that just sitting in Zazen is Buddhism, simply observing the form, has become a common way of thinking. Mahayana Buddhism holds that mind is more important than form and system. The direct experience of mind is first and foremost. Again, the idea that just sitting, Zazen, is Buddhism, simply observing the form, has become a common way of thinking. Mahayana Buddhism holds that mind is more important than form and system, and the direct experience of mind is first and foremost. And that brings to mind the story of Yaeko Iwasaki, whose story is quoted in the Three Pillars of Zen. She was a young Japanese girl in an era when TB was rampant in Japan. It's a cold, damp, wet country. And because they have no natural resources other than water, they have traditionally learned to live without much heat. Because importing fuel for heating or paying for electricity is quite expensive. And even in the wealthiest houses, there will be one room where there is a heating air conditioning unit, and that is only turned on when there is a guest. The only exception I know of this, and I've been in several high-class homes in Japan, and the only exception to this was the Japanese man who lived outside the back gate of Sogenji, who was a classical guitarist. And that's how he made his living. He had trained in Spain for decades. And his house was completely air conditioned and heated. And I'm sure he kept it that way to protect his guitars. But nobody else really does. And they have a lot of interesting inventions like electric carpets. They don't fly around, but they heat. If you sit on them, it's like sitting on an electric blanket. And they have electric cushions. They have electric things you can stick in your futon or under your futon. Actually, the bottom and the top are both called futons. In the winter to heat the bed up a little bit, and other marvelous inventions to help people keep warm. Nonetheless, I got frostbite every single year I was in Japan. That's quite an aside. But this statement of Mitra-roshi's that Zen, Mahayana Zen, is about far more than form. And in fact, it's not really about form at all. And Yaeko Iwasaki was that young woman whose father had connected with Zen and learned how to do Zazen. And inspired by him, she started doing Zazen. She happened to be dying of TB. And so there was no way she could sit up in a Zendo. She was coughing blood. She was feverish. And she died 3 weeks after she had an amazing set of Kensho experiences every single day of those 3 weeks. And Yasutani Roshi, I think, was at her bedside when she died. and said it was the most peaceful death he had ever witnessed. There is this woman who has gone profoundly deep in Zazen, not through sitting cross-legged or seiza on a cushion in a zendo, but through dealing with extreme adversity, terrible physical situation, and unable to do things like standard Zazen postures. And that brings, that sort of emphasizes the fact that it's what we do with our mind that makes the difference. It's not the form. The form was developed, and basically it came out of India, where people sat cross-legged traditionally. And because in Japan, in the old days, it's not currently the situation, but in the old days, people really didn't have the kind of furniture we have in the West. They would have what's called a kotatsu, which was a table that was over the fire pit. It's not a real fire, it was a charcoal fire. And in the winter, there would be that you could take the top off and you put a comforter or some kind of quilt over, and so people would sit in front of the kotatsu and they could cover their legs with this nice warm thing, and you feel the heat from the brazier underneath it. Nowadays they have electric kotatsus, and nowadays people have real beds. They don't all sleep on the floor, although we did do that in Sogenji. And then they do have sofas and chairs and dining room tables and so on. And the curious side effect of that is that the Japanese young folks, their body proportions are different from those of their parents and grandparents, because they're no longer sitting on the floor on their knees and limiting circulation, which somehow contributed to shorter legs in comparison to the upper body. Now they have the same body proportions as Westerners. But what we do with our mind is vital. And this is why practice can take place 24/7. We wake up in the middle of the night with some sense, some fear perhaps, a bit of anxiety, or some strange dream or something, to tune in and to sort of, it's a questioning beyond words, an exploration beyond words. Makes a big difference. And an ideal time to do this is just as you are about to drift off to sleep, or just as you're about to wake up, as you're starting to wake up, before the whole world has come into focus. It's a brief period of time where your usual habit patterns of thinking and assuming who you are and all the rest of that aren't there yet. They haven't come online yet. And you can have some deep insights in those moments if you tune in. Those are optimal times to practice, even just for a few minutes. And then, of course, the possibility of the extended out breath periodically through the day at some transition point. As you're about to go into the kitchen to start cooking, or even to get a glass of water, stop for one breath and let that breath be as if it were your last breath. I have a friend, a good friend, although I haven't seen him in quite a long time. He's Mexican and was for a long time at the Rochester Zen Center, and he actually did spend 3 months at Sogenji as well while I was there. His name is Angel Martinez, and at one point he went down to Mexico for a visit from when he was in Rochester, and went to visit somebody left the house or the apartment at 1 o'clock in the morning and got a taxi back to where he was staying. I think it was with his grandmother. And the taxi driver said, "Oh, I can take you on a quicker route. We can go off the main route and go on a quicker route, and it'll cost you less." And in those days, Mexico City had experimented with attempts to relieve the enormous air pollution that Mexico City endured, and I think probably still endures. I haven't been there for a long time. It's not unlike what the fires in Northern California are doing. It was quite rampant. And one of the ways they were trying to do that, which was not successful, was giving out license plates to people who had cars that limited their use one day during the week. And people responded by buying a second car so they could drive anytime they wanted to. And then another thing they did was they got Volkswagen Bugs, which are, I think, may still be made in Mexico. And they would take out the passenger seat in the front of the car. And so there was the driver in the front and room for 2 passengers in the back. So he was in one of those cars. And the driver kept saying, you know, really, I can make it less expensive for you. And so finally he says, all right. And the taxi veered off and went on a side street, came up to a stop sign and stopped. And another person got in and sat down next to Angel and said, empty your pockets. So Angel did, and he happened to have just gotten his credit card statement. And they saw that, and they said, okay, hand over your card. And they drove him to 3 different banks and said, you've got to pull money and give it to us. And he'd never learned his PIN numbers. And so he desperately tried to think of something and was not successful any of the times. And so finally they actually, I think they put a gun in his mouth, and they said, okay, out of the car, face down on the sidewalk. And at that point, he realized that the one thing he regretted was not having deep awakening. And so he started doing Susokan as if his life depended upon it. And in those moments, it seemed like it would. And suddenly he realized at some point, however much time went by, that he was not hearing the sound of the car motor anymore. And he dared to turn his face and look, and it was gone, which is why we know that story. So what you put into your Zazen is going to make a big difference in what comes out of it. Excuse me, I don't know why I've got this frog in my throat. Let's see if I can give him some water. So on that note, I'll go to the topic, which is the precepts. No, not the precepts. The Bodhisattva Vows. To be a Bodhisattva is to be on the path of coming to awakening for the benefit of all beings. So we're not doing it for ourselves. We're doing it for all of life. Because really, there's no difference. There's no barriers between ourselves and all of life. Yes, you can say, okay, this body is very precise, although it's always changing. And we're certainly not the same as we were when we were 2 years old. And give us another day or two, or even hour or a few minutes, and we'll not be the same. And science has documented that there is let's see how to point it out. Non-worded communication among beings. When I think about this wonderful dog that I've adopted, who is still kind of wild, but I've only had him for 3 weeks. We're getting to know each other, and he can hardly talk in English, but we're getting to know what each of us means when we open our mouths. So these vows that we take on the road to becoming a bodhisattva, actually on the road to becoming a Buddha, because as soon as we start taking these vows, we are already stepping into the bodhisattva role. Just the intention is formidable. Sentient beings are numberless, I vow to liberate them. That covers all kinds of things. Sentient beings can be other beings. It can also be the thoughts in our heads, the ideas of ourselves, the ideas of other people. We're filled with assumptions about everything. And those assumptions kind of lock us into a relatively rigid way of living. And to truly become enlightened is to experience the freedom from being controlled by these ideas, these assumptions, this conditioning. And that freedom is real. And every single being has that built in. So as we're doing our Zazen, we become aware of our attitudes, of our assumptions, of our conditioning. And traditionally, we're taught to ignore it and just to plunge deeper into the question of the koan. But the problem is, and we've seen this in the West, that when we do that, when we ignore what naturally comes up and in the process of coming up can be worked through and let go of, it stays stuck in our body. And so no matter how, quote, enlightened we become, we're still caught in that conditioning, those rigid ways of living, reacting to life instead of responding to it. And so to liberate all sentient beings means to let go of those. And in order to let go of them, we have to see what they are. And that means to walk bravely into our Zazen. Because it's so easy to assume that our Zazen is going terribly when we don't have this sweet and lovely mind state. But if we have a sweet and lovely mind state, I think it's more of concern than if we are struggling with trying to focus the mind, or when we're experiencing regrets and we're seeing more clearly how we've been behaving. That's where there's fertile ground for release and liberation. And that's all part of Zazen. And that's really important to recognize. And that's in essence what part of what Mitra-roshi was saying in that quote. Zazen is to become so completely aware that we're also aware of where we're not aware. We're also aware of where our behavior is not as ideal as we would like it to be, which of course, as I said, gives us the opportunity to then bring it to life, bring it to where we want it to be, bring it to, I wouldn't even say where we want it to be, bring it to enlightened behavior. So that's really part of the first Bodhisattva vow. The other thing is, as we do that, the energy of that increased clarity and freedom within ourselves is felt by countless other beings. And I'll give you an experience of this. Many, many years ago, when I was very early in the Rochester Zen Center, I was still in a state of extreme pain and turmoil out of my conditioning that I grew up with and the events that had happened since then. And Roshi Kapleau returned from his 3 months in Mexico. He did a traditional 3 months on, 3 months off schedule, and walked into the office where I was working at the time and said to me, "Oh, they said you'd lost a lot of weight." And I had, because I was in such distress. I think I lost about 20 pounds. Anyway, I in response to that, I burst into tears. And I asked him if I could talk to him. And he said yes. And we set a time. And so when the time came around, I knocked on the door of his quarters. And he opened it and said, "Please come in and have a seat here on the sofa." And he had this really funny special sofa built so that he could sit on it in full lotus. This was a man who, when he went to train in Japan in his early 40s, he couldn't possibly have sat full lotus. But by the time I knew him, he sat that way all the time. He had done a heck of a lot of yoga in order to get there. And also let go a lot in his mind, which allowed his body to be more flexible too. So I sat down, and all of a sudden, I just realized that however this anguish-filled experience that I was having turned out, whether it was positive or negative, it would be profoundly okay. And I kind of stammered, well, I guess it's just going to be okay however it comes out. And he said yes, and that was the end of the interview. I mean, there was nothing to talk about. I had tuned in to his mind state. And there's another example of this too, in that a story that was told to me by someone who was actually present when it happened. This was many, many decades ago when Mitra-roshi was still a monk in training at Shofukuji in Kobe. And he was one of the 4 head monks in the temple at the time. And they were outside the inner gate of the temple, on the temple property still, and doing some kind of detail that involved shovels and whatever, because the person who told it to me was holding a shovel. And I was told that there was a group at the time, there was a group of homeless people living on the property of the temple, and they, for some reason, were feeling that the temple was cheating them out of water. It's kind of hard to believe, given how much water there is in Japan. But anyway, that's what they felt. And the leader of this group, who, as the person was telling me, was no stranger to violence, went straight up to Harada and was literally in his face, furious, red-faced, extremely aggressive to Dosan, is what he was called back then. And Dosan simply got more and more quiet, he was fully present with the man. And I think this is important. He was looking him in the eyes. He was let go himself because he had had a deep awakening experience. And he was honoring this man by being present fully with him and not arguing back at that point. There was no point in arguing back, but simply listening, but listening 100%. And as the minutes unfolded, Mitra-roshi got quieter and quieter inwardly. And the man who had come up and was initially so aggressive and so ready for violence that the person that told me about this said he hung on to his shovel in case he needed to whack the guy if he took a swing at Dosan, which he didn't do. He just got more and more quiet himself. And gradually, I don't know what the upshot of it was, but the whole thing ended peacefully. Because this man had tuned into Dosan's mind state, because Dosan had been so present that it was possible. And so that's another meaning of that first Bodhisattva precept. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to liberate them. The next, the way it's recited as Sogenji is desires are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. But this bears some clarification. We at Mountain Gate and therefore at Turtleback have changed the wording from desire to clinging. Because it's not desire that's bad. If we didn't want to eat, we wouldn't last very long in this universe, and we would lose our chance at coming to awakening. If we didn't want to sleep, the same thing. There's a lot of desires that are appropriate to existence. When it gets out of hand, then there's a problem. And that comes out of clinging. Clinging to who we think we are and clinging to what we think things are about. It is a problem. It causes suffering. And that's what the Buddha said as well. The cause of our suffering is clinging. Trying to hang on to things when they're about to dissolve on us or leave us. Trying to avoid things that are there. And it goes on from there. We all know these. But to, again, tuning in to how it feels in the body when you want something. And here I go back to that time when I had my own business doing commercial interiors, banks and offices, and I was checking out that new catalog that had come into my office and saw these magnificent side chairs that could have fit perfectly with our Saarinen table. And we could have used them. We needed a few more chairs. And I thought, I should buy these chairs. And then the next thought that came to mind was, sure, go ahead, buy the chairs. Then how long do you think it would be before you had that same tug in your chest and something else you wanted? Would it be a few days, a few hours, a few minutes? And I realized that there would be a never-ending train of things that I would want to have. And I realized I had to get off that train, or it would be ongoing discomfort for the rest of my life. And I wasn't in for that. Which also made it possible to do Zazen when it was very, very difficult for me to do Zazen, because I realized that the only way to find lasting happiness was to go within and uncover it in there. And that kept me going through all the years of Zazen that I've undertaken, and now it's getting close to 50 years, which is amazing. When I was first at the Rochester Zen Center, I saw people who'd been living there and training there for 2 years, and I thought, oh my God, how they managed to do that all those years. Mm-hmm. Well, when you have no alternative, or I should say, when the alternatives are not worth pursuing, when you realize that they're only going to end up in more pain and suffering, then you're willing to do it. So that is that second Bodhisattva vow. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to liberate them. Desires or clinging is forever. I vow to let go of it. The dharmas are boundless. I vowed to master them. Now, the actual word, the actual translation, and I don't know how it ended up being becoming the dharmas, because it's really the dharma gates are boundless. What is a dharma gate? A dharma gate is any time we are we have an opportunity to free ourselves. They're disappointments, they're challenges, and right now the world is full of them. But each one of these offers an opportunity for willing to walk in and wordlessly explore. Then we can liberate ourselves from whatever the caught place of that particular dharma gate is. These days, so many people are struggling with anxiety, fear, depression, because the usual ways we are accustomed to living are no longer available to us. We're very much limited in our movements. There's a lot of fear about this invisible virus that can strike anybody. Initially, it was thought it was just going to hit people who were older and more vulnerable because they had underlying conditions like diabetes or excess weight or were smokers or had other situations going on, like they already had cancer or something like that. But then kids started getting it and dying. And then people who were younger and theoretically healthy were getting it and dying. And it's such an unknown disease. They're beginning to find out more and more about it, but there still is no real way to defeat it yet. It's just like the flu. The flu is another coronavirus. And every year it comes back in some mutated form. And every year, some people get it and some people don't. And some people who get it so badly or have such additional effects as a result of it that they die. The pandemic it started in 1918, I think, and went around the world something like 3 times before it finally began to die out, was a flu also. It was also a coronavirus. So here we have this unseen, formidable enemy that seems to strike out of nowhere with no warning. And although sometimes there is a warning, like if you don't take care, you're more liable to be to contract it. If you do remain masked in public and socially distance and limit your travel and all the rest of that, you're less likely, but less likely doesn't mean not at all. There's just a lot going on. And then people's reactions to all of this is amplifying the anxiety. The folks that are claiming all kinds of negative, mysterious things like the QAnon conspiracy, people who are ready to bring their guns and try to threaten peaceful protesters, and there's just so much going on right now. It is a time of fertile change, and that's one of these Dharma gates. We have a chance to change a lot in the way we think, the way we do, the way we react, the way we accept or reject, because the negatives are being shown up right in our face. So when something happens, you learn that a dear friend has got COVID and is dying, and your heart goes out and the anxiety builds, right then to walk in, to feel what it feels like, to offer it that radical acceptance. I don't have to like this situation, but, well, this is how it appears to be. And that's the same attitude that, well, I think actually Shido Bonan was more let go than that even, when he was accused of fathering this infant that he didn't, and had to raise it for a whole year in Japan. So I don't know if this is clear enough, and happily we'll have a chance for asking questions, because this Dharma Gates thing is very, very vital, and it's filled with opportunities. Every one of us experiences multiple Dharma Gates in a year, in a day, in a minute. Somebody calls and we think, oh shoot, do I have to talk to that person? Or somebody doesn't call and our heart goes, oh, why didn't they call? All kinds of situations. Whether or not we're going to have a job at the end of the day, at the end of the month, at the end of the year. Many, many years ago, way, way before COVID, my older son had just bought a new car because the car he had was not going to make it without more expense than what he'd pay if he just bought a new car. So he bought a new car on Friday. Monday he goes into the office. There's a pink slip on every single person's desk. It turns out that the guy who was doing all the money business at the company had not, for the past 10 years, since the beginning of the company, had not paid anybody's FICA and had pocketed it and disappeared. And the IRS had finally caught up with him and frozen what assets were left. And so not only were they not going to be paid for the previous 2 weeks, they were not going to be paid from then on. There's no money to pay him with. And the company went belly up. And suddenly he, with the brand new car payments to make, had no work and a small child. And these kinds of things happen for people, and they're happening more right now. We can have a sudden windfall and we can have a sudden downturn. how we respond to these things makes all the difference in the world. Mitra-roshi talks about a family, and I believe actually it was his own family. They were sake brewers. And at one point, and this is before there was such a thing as insurance in Japan, the factory burned down. And that was that. The company was gone. It was impossible to build it back up again. And the family, because they had never lived high on the hog, they had always lived very simple lives. They were able to continue on simply living a simple life. And his own father became a fortune teller, actually, and eventually became a Buddhist priest. But they managed, they survived, because they didn't have a lot of big ideas about what they felt like they needed to have to survive. And there's a key there too. The more Zazen we do, the less we feel like we have to have whatever. And each of us knows, what it is that we've let go of so far in our lives. Each of us knows what might still be sticky. And then the final Bodhisattva vow is about awakening. And the way of liberation is unsurpassable. I vow to become it. The translation is the Buddha way, but because there are many ways in which people can come to awakening. I think of Flora Courtois. I think of Jacques Lucéran. I think of the Catholic woman that I met who, as a child taking her first communion, had what I'm sure was a Kensho experience. And it does not necessarily depend on Buddhism. So it's the way of liberation that is unsurpassable. Not necessarily any specific religion. I vow to become it, and that is most important, because no matter how deep Kensho experience or multiple Kensho experiences we would have, unless we bring them to life in everything we do or say or think, they are useless. They're a nice idea. They may have given us a hit of joy for a while, but if we don't continue to deepen them and broaden them and bring them into our own life, which means seeing where we're caught and tuning in, which allows that caught place to be let go of. And in that way, we're truly becoming liberated. And in that way, we are actually liberating all sentient beings. So that's it about the four Bodhisattva vows. And now if people have questions, I'm happy to respond.
Mitra, I had a question about the sticky parts.
Mm-hmm.
I'll bring up a current one. So like at work, during this time, a lot of things are a bit strange. And then my boss left and there's a turnover in management.
Oh, wow.
And it's a second turnover in management. So there's all this strife. So there's fear. I see fear rise within me,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then I try to touch. And it even goes back to the fear, the part of me that was fearful when we'd get evicted as kids, because my father would be laid off, right? So I see that line, how it triggers those parts.
Mm-hmm. That's a good insight. So What does it feel like? What does that anxiety feel like in your body? What's the energy of that anxiety?
It's a tightening in the chest.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's also a pushing away because I don't want to experience it.
Yep. So if you walk in, what's the quality of the tightening? Is it like hot wires wrapped around you? Is it like steel bands? Is it like some elephant sitting on your chest? What's the quality of it?
Yeah, pressure, tingly, and hot.
Uh-huh. Good. Since you're such an incredible artist, which I know you are, um, try drawing it. Try painting it. And it would be lovely to see a painting of that.
I'd have follow up on that, Mitra, too. Thank you. I will do that.
Great, great. And it's a way of working with anything that comes up. It's interesting that when you tune in to the point where you're so present with the energy of it and out of your head, so it's not about the story, because the story can keep the darn thing going forever. But if you tune into the energy of it in your body, there's space around it, and all kinds of good things can happen. Mind state of ease, of peace can come up. Insights into what your alternatives could be. There's a lot. It opens doorways that were hidden before that. It's a dynamite way to live in general, and it's a way to open those Dharma doors.
Yeah, as you feel them arise, sometimes it's hard to know how to process them, because one of the things that also arises is, should I take action? Because at different times, things are unstable, and I think, oh, it's time to look for a new job. And sometimes I'm glad because the old project was shut down. I did it just in time.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's hard for me to navigate. Should I just sit and be and let it pass, or is there also time, to act? And
yeah, that will come to you if you're truly present.
Okay.
With the energy. Then, like I say, the space will open out so that you aren't so compelled to act immediately, but insight will come. Maybe 2 or 3 different doors will be obvious that could be a direction to go in, and you'll get an inner sense of the right direction to go in, as opposed to a head sense that's driven by the anxiety.
Yeah, it feels like it's a panicky decision. We have to make a decision.
Yeah. Yep. And it's understandable, given your history, it's very understandable. But when you tune in like that, it's amazing. I mean, my own experiences with that were when I was living in Turkey and had gone to my first session in Rochester, commuting. And even though it was a hell on wheels session, as they were for quite a long time after that, I knew somewhere deep inside that I needed to go live in Rochester. It made no sense whatsoever. I loved living in Turkey. I had a life there. I was making enough money to survive there. And, the experience with Zen up to that point had been difficult and painful. So why go towards it? But there's some sense that, despite the fact that I didn't even know, I'd never been to Rochester, didn't even know if I'd actually be able to live at the center. I didn't know if there would be space, and actually there wasn't initially. But and I needed to do it. And I had so little money that all I could do was go. I couldn't bring any of my furniture or anything. And interestingly enough, I sold it before I left. And the person that was a good friend of mine who took the money, the Turkish lira, to the black market to change it into dollars, ended up there was a rumor that there was going to be a devaluation, so nobody would change money. So instead, he bought himself a house in Turkey, and I never saw it. But that I have no feelings about it one way or the other. No regrets. I mean, it was exactly the right thing to do to move to Turkey, from Turkey to Rochester. And then the other major time in my life when that was the case is I had the sense at the end of all my training in Rochester that I needed to continue training. And at that point, I had already met Mitra-roshi and gone to sesshin with him. As a matter of fact, somebody gifted me a sesshin with him. And I knew I had to go to Japan and to Sogenji and train with him there. And I went to Japan briefly for 3 months, took leave from Rochester to do that, and spent 2 months of it at Sogenji and realized that there was really, I had to go back. But it was a gut sense of needing to go back, that was the direction my life should take at that point. In between then and when I actually went back, which was a number of months, I got severely ill. I got hepatitis, I got meningitis, I got encephalitis, and I got a secondary infection that basically took out the right side of my face. And I think Shotai knew me before that happened. None of the rest of you did. And I don't know, Shotai, did you actually ever see me with my Halloween nightmare face? Oh, you're you're muted. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
I saw you when you had tape, when you were putting tape to hold your face up.
Yeah, because kids were bursting into tears. If they saw me, their parents were running away. People I knew were avoiding me. It was quite an experience, because I mean, I really did look like this half my face was kind of dripping off my chin because it had no nerves. And it's gradually come back. For months, I couldn't close my right eye, and so on and so forth. And I still knew that I needed to go back and train it in Japan. And there were a couple of people in Rochester who had actually spent time in Japan. They said, "You're crazy." And I had been at Sogenji. I'd actually been in Japan into December. So I knew something about not being warm. and it just was the right thing to do. And it really was. I went anyway, despite everybody saying, "You're stupid, you're crazy." So, and the same thing with coming up here. When I left Japan, my father had died that February. And in September, by the time I was back in the United States, his will was probated, so I had some money. And I thought, well, I should take this money, I should rent an apartment in Santa Fe and start having zazen for people. And because at that point, Mitra-roshi had said, you're sanctioned to teach independently. You don't have to be supervised anymore. And so, because that's where the people were, in Santa Fe and Albuquerque and so on. And yet this piece of property right here called me. And I finally thought, okay, when it came up for sale, I bought it with my inheritance. And it was nothing but raw land. Somebody had given me a travel trailer, a very old, 30-year-old travel trailer that they had lived in for 10 years. And another friend's hauled it up it was sitting behind the house of a friend here until another Zen friend who was able to do the power drop brought electricity and then I had some water too. But the travel trailer was useless in terms of anything but a roof over my head. Nothing worked in it, and it was pretty interesting living in it. I couldn't afford to heat the thing, and the plumbing was all broken anyway. So the outhouse was it. I bought a wash tub, would fill it with water, leave it outside in the nice hot sun, and when it got warm enough, I'd wash clothes and things. It was an experience, you know. One night in the middle of winter, and if you're living in a tin can, it's quite cold because there's something about the heat transfer. It disappears out of the outside, and all the cold comes in. And middle of the night, I wake up because I had been using a hot water bottle at my feet, and I realized I was wet all the way up to my waist, and I had to change clothes. If I didn't, I was going to die of hypothermia. There was no question about that. So little things like that. I would sleep in my sleeping bag with the two heavy boiled wool blankets that we had in Canada when I was a kid, folded in half over me. So I had like the sleeping bag plus 2 layers of boiled wool, and the hot water bottle. And now we have this incredibly beautiful building. I mean, it only took, see, that was 1996. So 24 years to get to this. And it was all because, you know, it just felt right to live on this land and not to spend my inheritance on renting an apartment in Santa Fe and hoping people would come. Santa Fe has got umpty-ump Zen centers, even that little city.
Mitra, if I could reflect on that, is that okay?
Yeah.
To me, it sounds like a story of really surrendering into something deeper than our small self. And as I reflect, it's the small self that gets the anxiety. And when you let that go, you allow the flow to enter and the flow to happen, which you just given a beautiful example.
Yeah, no, that you're right on that. You know, when we get out of our own way, when we leave the stories behind and tune into presence and living with a capital L, then things unfold, and even difficult things can happen, but somehow we're not negatively impacted by them.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, one of the reasons why, well, I have many reasons why I didn't have a problem with living up here in this little tin can with no plumbing. When I was very small, we lived in my grandparents' summer cottage, this little Victorian cottage in a little enclave in Amish, Pennsylvania. And there was no indoor plumbing then either. We had to go and haul water in a bucket, and we had an outhouse, which was a horrible, awful, stinky place. Pitch black dark, and despite the cutouts for the moon on each side. And then living in Japan, where it was so blessed cold in the winter. So it wasn't a problem to be up here. And being up here is so amazing. And, you know, we built the Zendo first because that was the most important thing to build. And we didn't even have a roof on it, a proper roof. We had the beams, and we had planking, and we had insulation and tarps. And it almost was a disaster because the snow would melt and run down the sides of the adobe walls and melt them out like waterfalls. anyway, there was somebody here who had come for 3 months from college, and he lived in the Zendo, where we had to build 2x4 platforms, little, you know, a 2x horizontally and a piece of plywood, to keep the guys from having to sleep in the mud, because there was literally mud. And he and I would do Zazen in the middle of the winter, and we'd go outdoors for Kinhin, and it was just phenomenal. The light, the snow, it was joyous. Even though it was freezing cold, there was no electricity in the Zendo back then. We had kerosene lanterns for light, and mud.
Roshi,
Yeah.
are you going to be taping your responses to this? Is that going to, are you going to record all of the stuff that you, because well, the reason I'm asking is that Jeremy, what is your Dharma name, Jeremy?
Genshin.
Genshin's question and your response to it really almost mirrors a conversation I had with Retna, and I'm really hoping that your questions and answers are also going to be recorded.
They are being recorded now, yeah.
I think Retna would really.
And
really
Retna's here. She just joined.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Any other questions? Yeah.
I don't know. Oh, go ahead. Did you have a question, Retna?
Oh, I'm a little bit confused in my mind because there are so many questions. Like Mitra-roshi just talked about finding a joy in the situations, like you said, about sitting in the snow, cold. I actually am, since I left my job, I've been going out in the woods, in the trails, especially in the nature. I find almost an experience every time I step in the woods, I get this emotion, I am taken care of. Mm-hmm. As soon as I exit the woods, I feel almost I'm back into the rush and other human elements that I don't know how to interpret my own experience here. I do, every time I feel like there is an orchestra when I go into the woods. Birds are singing, everything is happy. I'm one with it. But when I enter the human, this outside the trail, I feel anxiety. I feel how because it seems to me there are a lot more unknowns and I cannot relate to it because unexpected things, there are so many agendas. People are working with their minds, which I don't have a control on how everyone is seeing, and I feel a little unstable. I don't know how to, I don't know if this is a question. It's something I'm experiencing.
You know, Genshin asked almost the same question.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you came in after I talked to him about it. But two things came to mind when you were talking about it. First of all, when you're in the forest, you're forgetting yourself. When you come back out of the forest, you jump back into your stories and your history. And so the important thing is to not to try to bring the forest into your life, but to bring the let go-ness that comes from simply allowing yourself to be back out of the forest. Because that's built into you. And what is happening when you come out of the forest is all the ideas and constructs and history that you've experienced are sort of coming back online, and to feel it in your body. Feel that anxiety in your body. Don't try to get back to the forest. Let yourself feel the full impact of what it feels like to come back out of there, and tune in to each moment. Practice, for example, if there's a room in your house where the light is particularly beautiful, if there are plants in your house that you're caretaking, really be there with those experiences. And that goes for all of us, really. There's that famous saying of Ram Dass, "Be here now." It sounds kind of flip, but when we were truly present with the moment, which you were in the forest, that's we can bring that to life no matter where we are, by really focusing on the experience of being where we are. And if it involves anxiety, to tune in to the anxiety.
Thank you.
Genshin is an artist, and so I was suggesting to him that he paint what the anxiety feels like, the sensations, not the idea about it, but the sensations in his body. And that's something we can all do. In fact, we teach it to the women veterans with PTSD when they come here. When we are small children, we have this awe and this presence, and it kind of gets conditioned out of us because the culture we grow up in demands certain things of us, and so we begin to feel cramped and maybe diminished and maybe cheated, and a lot of things that are negatives. People can also feel something very positive as well, and that can tend to sometimes get out of become an obsession. So it's about being a child again.
Mm-hmm.
It's about being so present, because that's what you were in the forest. And the fact that you can be it in the forest, you can be it right here now, in your house. You can be it within the anxiety, which doesn't mean denying the anxiety, doesn't mean pushing the anxiety away, even though it feels uncomfortable. It means exploring what it actually feels like in your body. What is that energy? What's the quality of the energy? Does it flow? Does it jerk? Does it go up and down? Is it jagged? Is it cold? Is it hot? Is it electric? All of these ways of really tuning into what's going on in our body.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
And George is a chiropractor, and I'm sure he does that naturally, just in terms of tuning into his patients and understanding how to help them.
George is iPhone 5.
Yeah.
Roshi, I was going to just really get a little feedback on what's been going on these last few days when people have come on at our sittings, and they've wanted to talk about the president having COVID and being in the hospital and stuff, and and everybody has a lot of mixed emotions about this. It's not simple. And and so this one person said, well, I guess we need to sit now and just try to get this out of our minds. And I said, no, what we need to do is to sit with it, and be with it. This is what's happening right now. We have these very complicated emotions about the president being in the hospital with COVID.
It depends on what you mean by be with it, because
we can't, it's like to go and sit and say, okay, get into the breath and pay attention and just, you can't forget about it because it's an emotion that's sitting there, very confusing and conflicting and everything. And so the better thing is to just pay attention to how that emotion feels.
Yeah, feels
Pay attention to the,
energetically. The thing is, we can dwell in emotions. We can wallow in emotions. We have to go beneath the overt quote feeling, close quote, into the sensations.
yeah, that's what I was suggesting, that this is what's happening right now. This is what this is present. This is like a very present thing. It's causing tremendous anxiety and confusion and conflicted feelings in people all over the place. And so it's more important to really find out how that feels, like just be with how that feels.
Yeah, and the danger here, Shotai, sorry to interrupt you. The danger here is in the language. Because when we talk about feels, we talk about we're assuming emotions mostly, and
No, I'm talking about body feelings.
Sensations is a better word to use.
Yeah,
because feelings it are so often interpreted as emotions. I feel angry. I feel upset. I feel anxious. And it's
but that's being in the story and thinking about it. It was my suggestion was that we just go and examine. When I say how it feels, how does the body feel? Like like you said, the sensations in the body. I guess maybe the terminology is
most effective to say sensations rather than feelings.
Yeah.
Right. No, I mean, we don't try to suppress anything. However, if it's just a minor thing, we don't go chasing after any old thing that pops up in our minds. If it's something that's sticky, like this all-pervading anxiety that so many people are feeling, then we want to tune into the sensation of this flow of anxiety, and whether it is like waves on the ocean, or whether it is like electricity in a wire. What is it like? But be careful about talking about feelings, because feelings, most people don't get the difference between feelings and sensations.
Yeah, I mean, I always thought of feelings as something you feel, like it's in your body, but I understand that can be confusing.
Yeah.
Your feelings could be just some way you're talking about your thoughts or something, but I guess sensations is the better term to use.
Yeah.
And the other question is, we're reading the 9 o'clock group. We read a chapter of the book that you recommended, and I can't pronounce his name, the Tibetan guy in Love of the World.
Rinpoche, yeah, young and
so, he's in this park, and this guy comes and says, he tries to sit, he stands up, he sits, he stands up, and he comes over and asks the Rinpoche, what, are you a monk? Are you meditating? He says, yes. He says, I'm having so much trouble. I just can't do it. I've got all these thoughts and stuff. And so he said, well, you're very lucky because you're aware of your thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you do is say, I'm aware of thinking. I'm aware of my thoughts. That's what I'm doing right now. And just, I mean, that's a little bit, sounds a little bit contrary to what you just said, but
for beginners, that's it. And in Theravadan Buddhism, there's the tradition of noting our mind states, noting our thoughts when they come up, good, bad, or neutral. That's a preliminary practice, and one that has to be eventually moved from, sort of like taking the training wheels off your bike when you're a kid, and daring to go on your own out into the unknown without that extra support. So no, he was talking to a man who had probably not very much experience with meditation, and so he was speaking to him in terms of what was going on for him then. And if for somebody else who was more experienced meditator, he would probably have answered differently.
Except I get the feeling like sometimes just because of just situations that's going on around us, sometimes there's just all kinds of, thoughts about it, like it's really based on anxiety, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's better to say, rather than to sit there and be caught in the thoughts and not be able to get back into your breath, or somebody say, oh, I guess I'm really worrying about this, I'm thinking about that, and just at least acknowledge, be aware that this is what you're doing. So there's an awareness that, just sitting there blindly going off on a tangent. And then with that awareness, then start to look to see how it not feels, how the sensations are of that, because there's a reason for going around in circles in your head. I mean, because there's some emotion that's so if you can first of all be aware that that's what you're doing.
The thing is this, we have almost constant yada, well, actually is a constant yada yada.
Mm-hmm.
And it's there to alleviate anxiety. It's there to make us feel like we exist. When Descartes said, I think, therefore I am, he was onto something there, because if we're not thinking, am I going to disappear? The other side of that coin is when Mario Montesa, the man who was stabbed in the heart and basically died for 6 to 8 minutes, when he finally was able to think again, which took him many, many months before his brain came back online that he could do that, he said it was a terrible disappointment. All of a sudden, there was something between him and reality. When we think of thoughts as the noise in our head, which is a good part of what it can be, and any of us who have been traumatized have often recycling thoughts that are only there because they're constantly being reinforced, and so it's not so much as getting involved with them fully, like what you're saying. It's about, if they're really sticky, then you sort of glance at them, give them your full attention, like Mitra-roshi did to that man, the homeless man, and then go back and really take that breath out farther. And as you take that breath out farther, maybe 4 or 5 times, you'll find yourself back in the breath. It's a little bit dangerous to get too far into the working with the feelings thing, because we can make that our practice and therefore avoid practice that would allow us to come to awakening.
Well, my experience is that working with the feelings or sensations, I have to correct my terminology here a bit. My experience is that when I really pay attention to the sensations in the body and really give them my attention, they start moving around in different places, and after a while I can't find them. And that's when I have the freedom to go back to the breath.
Yeah, you just have to be careful that it's only the major feelings that you're dealing with, because our mind is full of stuff, and most of it is simply habitual and habitually reinforced and of no import at all, and not really interfering with things. When we are out and about, not on the cushion, to spend a little bit more time in the direction you're talking about can be very effective. But on the cushion, we want to make the practice foremost. And that doesn't mean elbowing anything out of the way. It means only if things are really major and, you know, really sticky, then to tune in and wordlessly sort of feel your way around them, explore them, until you have that sense of them dissolving.
Mm-hmm.
And but otherwise, to do what you're talking about more outside the Zendo. Otherwise, there is a real danger of it becoming the foremost practice and actually interfering with deepening. There's a real subtle balance.
Yeah, because I'm not quite grasping that. Because my feeling is that the reason it happens that you're not being able to get into the practice the way you want to is because something is churning around in your head, sticky. And so the only thing to do with that is to get into the sensations of it so that you can finally let it go.
Yeah, if it's seriously sticky, yes. But if it's mildly sticky, no, because that, as I say, that can become a practice that replaces your actual Zen practice. And we all have sticky stuff. Nobody, as far as I know, well, very few people, I suppose, I have yet to meet one, has sat down and been able to focus their mind deeply from the moment they started doing Zazen. All of us are working with stuff that comes up, little distractions here and there, the mind bouncing around here and in there, and sometimes a struggle to go back to the breath, and otherwise, you know, dealing with the breath. And the earlier you are in your work in Zazen, the more of that is going to come up, because we're habituated to using our minds in certain ways. And then if you have also trauma in the background, that can emphasize that. So it's, as I said, it's a real balance. It's a real balance.
Yeah.
Tuning into the moment, being as fully aware, but with that openness to possibility that there's going to be something that you're going to realize, which is different from the focus on focusing on a particular sensation. I mean, it's all about focusing on the moment as it appears to be bodily, with that curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not about it's about what lies beyond, what lies beyond.
So back again to the thing about, you know, the president of the United States being in pretty bad shape in the hospital right now.
Mm-hmm.
The feeling that it's making everybody uncomfortable, which is something we should probably embrace, is a feeling of not knowing.
And
I mean,
that's
really a strong.
Yeah. And that is ubiquitous right now. And that's what Genshin brought up too. This not knowing and the anxiety that it brings up. But that's fertile ground for practice.
That's what I was thinking. It's just, but how do you do that? How do you sit with not knowing? Give me some like very practical, practical sense of how I'm going to sit with this not knowing.
Okay, well, you tune in to the energy of the anxiety, the energy of the unsteadiness, and you search beyond that wordlessly. I mean, it's like you drop beneath, through, so you're not denying, but through this sense of pervasive anxiety to wordless questioning of who is it that feels this?
So is not knowing really where you're supposed to be all the time? Like just not trying to make expectations and trying to make you know, trying to kind of control stuff or something. Is just really, it's like to just learn to be with not knowing, and then just deal with the sensations of how that feels. It's very uncomfortable, and yet that's supposed to be the place we're supposed to be, right?
It's uncomfortable because it's not familiar.
Yeah.
When you tune into it to the point where you're fully one with it, there isn't any discomfort. There's no problem. An example of this is, at a certain point many years ago, the terror that I had lived with all my life and had managed to keep mainly under wraps started coming up big time. And some of you have heard this before, but because of spending a good deal of my childhood in Canada, northern Canada, where across the street from school every winter, which snowed in early September and continued snowing in May, we had a skating rink was set up every winter. And so my brother and I got skates for Christmas one year, and we would take our skates to school and go across the street and skate for an hour, and our dad would pick us up from work. So I have this image of skating. And the metaphor for what happened with this terror was that, first of all, I'd done a fair amount of work on it already, but it was in my face. And so I had this image of trying to skate across this broad lake, very broad lake, where the ice was beginning to melt, and so it was not stable. And I would put my skate out and the ice would crack. And I'd stop for a minute and feel that anxiety. Put the other skate out, crack, feel that sense of anxiety, and continue on. And in about a year and a half, what happened was suddenly I realized I was all the way across the lake, and terror, fear just had no bite anymore. It was sort of familiar and kind of like, I don't know, a soft wind blowing on a day, or the sunshine, or the clouds moving, or, I mean, it had no bite, And the more we can stay present, and this is 24/7 work. This is not just on the cushion. And just on the cushion, it would be best to try to bring our mind through the cloud of uncertainty to a deeper wordless questioning. How do I know I'm feeling this way? Who is it that's feeling this way? What's it all about? Only these are not in words. This is this openness to possibility, wordlessly questioning, seeking the source. That is what you want to do on the cushion, using the extended out breath to focus and to also expand awareness, which is what it does. And then otherwise, when you're, the other 20 some hours of the day, when anxiety would come up, then you work with it in the way you were just describing, where you tune in to the anxiety per se. Now, if it comes up, if something has happened that is of major significance in your life or the world, and is impacting you big time, so that you can't walk into the Zendo and still let it stay at the door, like, okay, I'll see you in a bit. I'll work with you later. I have this other different level of work to do. If it's like that, then you can work with it in the Zendo as well, in that way of tuning into the felt sense of the energy. But you see the difference? There's a subtle difference between what becomes more psychological work and what becomes more the work of practice, which is working towards a deeper level of liberation. The psychological work is very important, but if we're truly to be free, the deeper level also needs to be undertaken in an ongoing manner, because we can become that free so that there's not a problem with anxiety, there's not a problem with not knowing. Somehow things will work out one way or the other. And I think about Jacques Lusseron in this respect. There he is in about the worst circumstances you can imagine a human being being, with death and the threat of death everywhere, with people going crazy, with ritual starvation, with people dying all the time, with such immense crowding in that barracks that he was housed in that you couldn't move without touching another human being. I'm not sure how they all managed to lie down at night. Maybe they didn't manage to lie down at night. He talks about the 3-day train trip in a cattle car going to Buchenwald, where there were 100 men in each cattle car, and you could not, you couldn't even sit down. And there was one guy who managed to lie down by basically beating everybody else up. But by the time he got out of those 3 days of travel, he could put his finger all the way into the swelling in his lower legs. Things like that. And yet, out of that set of experiences, he had a profound awakening that stayed with him for the rest of his life. And he found joy. That is our capacity as well. But, you know, we kind of have to wade through or drop beneath the surface conditioning. And here I think about this man I watched when I was on a ferry crossing the Bosphorus one day many years ago, and he was swimming. And since ancient times, the beautiful old wooden houses that hung over the edge of the water would just drop their garbage in the water, and so he's swimming through garbage. Bobbing orange peels and God knows what else. And in a sense, that's kind of what we're doing when we live our usual life. We have our own version of that, but we don't need to stay stuck in it, because that's not who we really are. So as you get further into that book, you will get to a place where he is dying. And it goes into detail of how he's working with that.
We read the chapter, the last chapter we read together, and not everybody was there, so we're probably going to read it again when more people are the usual more people are there. But it was where to really be able to accept dying is to give away everything, give away the mountain, give away the stream, everything that would give you joy or pleasure. You just give it away to somebody. I mean, it's just, that was, I mean, like even specifically give it away to somebody was troublesome to you, you give away the most beautiful things, but just give it all away.
You know what? I have a friend who, when she was in grade school, the teachers talked about that, about the joy of giving away something that really is important to you to have. And so she ran home and found a doll that she just absolutely was most fond of. And she gave it to somebody else. And she wrote that she had, or she told me, she didn't write, she told me that she experienced the most amazing joy when she gave that very most precious thing in her whole life to somebody else, let go of it. And that's the attitude we want to take with our thoughts. and our ideas about ourselves. And it'll make an enormous difference. When he talked about the mountain, it was the mountain he grew up on, and he loved it. He loved being up there high in the sky and with all the different views and so on. So rather than longing to get back to it, because there he was on the ground in flat India at the time, he was not going to be back in Nepal where he grew up. He had to let it go.
So he purposely let her go by giving it away to somebody, you know, like in his mind, he just gave it away.
Yeah. But he actually did let it go.
Are you leaving, George? We can't hear you. You're muted. We can't hear you. We still can't hear you. You're still muted. There you go.
There you go. Yes, I need to leave right now. Thank you for hosting this, and thank you, Roshi, for the wonderful talk.
You're welcome.
It's great to see you again, George.
Okay, bye.
George is basically a neighbor. So, well, sort of, 2 hours away.
About 2.5 hours away, right?
Yeah, thanks, George. So we're already, there's been a lot of time. Does anybody else have any other questions?
I don't know if Daishin has ever been with us. Do you have any? Because he doesn't respond to us when we speak to him.
That's all right.
Okay.
Maybe he doesn't have anything to say. So thank you all for being here. And it's great seeing you. Please.
Thank you very much, Roshi.
Thank you, everyone. Great to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.